Assalamualaikum, my name is Putri Emelisa binti Muhammad Basri. My metric number is 053547. So I'm going to talk about what to assess in speaking. Before that, I'm going to explain what is the definition of speaking. So speaking is a productive skill. It is mean that you use the language that you have acquired and produce a message through speech or a written text that you want others to understand. So most teachers will be familiar with the concept of grading with a rubric, a table with different criteria, and a grading scale. So what are the criteria? There are 6 of them: pronunciation, vocabulary, communications, accuracy, interactions, and fluency. Okay. The first one, pronunciation. It is a basic quality of language learning. Though most second language learners will never have the pronunciation of a native speakers, poor pronunciation can obscure communication and prevent any ESL students from making its meaning known. When evaluating the pronunciation of your student, listen for clearly articulated words, a proper pronunciation of unusual spellings and assimilations and contractions in suitable places. Also listens for intonation. Are students using the correct inflections for the types of sentences they are saying? Do they know that the inflection of a question is different from that of a statement? Listen for these pronunciation skills and determine to which level your students falls. Number 2, vocabulary. After noting your student pronunciation level, move to vocabulary. Vocabulary comprehension and vocabulary productions are always two separate banks of words in the mind of a speaker's, native as well as second language. You should encourage your student to have a large production vocabulary and an even larger recognition vocabulary. For this reason, it is helpful to evaluate your students on the level of vocabulary they are able to produce. Are they using the specific vocabulary you have instructed when in class? Are they using vocabulary appropriate to the context in which they are speaking? Listen for the level of vocabulary your students are able to produce without prompting, and then decide how well they are performing in this area. Okay, number 3. So accuracy. Grammar has always been and forever will be an important issue in foreign language study. Writing sentences correctly on a test, though, is not the same as accurate spoken grammar. As your students speak, listen for the grammatical structures and tools you have taught them. Are they able to use multiple tenses? Do they have an agreement? Is word order correct in the sentence? All the and more are important grammatical issue, and an effective speaker will successfully include them in his or her language. So number 4, communication. So a student may struggle with grammar and pronunciation, but how creative is she when communicating with the language she knows? So assessing communication in your student means looking at the creative use of the language they do know to make their points understood. A student with a low level of proficiency, vocabulary, and grammar may have excellent communication skill if she is able to make you understand her. Whereas an advanced student who is tied to manufacturing dialogues may not be able to be expressive with language and would therefore have low communication skills. Don't let a lack of language skill keep your student from expressing themselves. The more creative they can be with language and the more unique ways they can express themselves, the better their overall communication skills will be. So number 5, being able to say what you mean with a foreign language is one thing. Being able to interact with others is another. So ask your student question. Observe how they speak to one another. Are they able to understand and answer questions? Can they answer you when you ask them questions? All these are elements are necessary for clear and effective communications in English. A student will with effective interaction skill will able to answer questions and follow along with the conversations happening around him. Great oratory skills will not get anyone very far if he or she cannot listen to other people and respond appropriately. Encourage your student to listen as they speak and appropriate responses to other in the conversations. So last but not least, fluency. So fluency may be the easiest quality to judge in your students speaking. How comfortable are they when they speak? How easily do the words come out? Are there great pauses and gaps in student speaking? If they are, then your student is struggling with fluency. So fluency does not improve at the same rate as other language skill. You can have an excellent grammar and still fail to be fluent. You want your student to be at ease when they speak to you or other English speakers. Fluency is a judgment of this ease of your communication and is an important criterion when evaluating speaking. That's all. Thank you.
Name is Mugasima Shah bin Masani. Metric number is 053472. So now I'm gonna explain about how the speaking skill can be tested. So there's a lot of method to test the speaking skill. I've found three categorized how to test the speaking skill. So the first one is intensive speaking task. There are three categorized tasks. Okay, the first one is intensive speaking task. So in a scheme speaking task, one of the tasks I'm gonna explain is a read aloud task. So basically, you as a student, as a teacher, give a student maybe an article or a storybook and ask the student to read aloud in the classroom. So from there you can evaluate the student's fluency or maybe his pronunciation, his phonological. So next is responsive speaking task, which is you can do giving instruction and direction. So uh, although it is speaking skill, if you are by giving direction or instruction to some student, we also can test their responsive speaking skill. So maybe example, we give the student direction to maybe some part of schools and see if the student follow the direction we give them properly. So from there we can evaluate their speaking skill, their understanding, their responsive, also their responsive in speaking. So the last one is I'm gonna talk about is interactive speaking skill. So from this category, I choose interview. I'm gonna explain about. I choose interview task. So interview task for me is a bit challenging for the student, a bit advanced for the student because in interview, uh, the students gonna talk to us, gonna respond to us spontaneously because they do not know what they are gonna be asked about, what we are gonna talk about to them. So from there we can get them to speak unprepared. We talk to them, we try to hold a conversation to them with them. So from there we can really see their speaking skill at the highest level from there. So I think that's all for me on how the speaking skill can be tested. So thank you for listening and I'll see and Assalamualaikum.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Wan Abdul Hadi Hakimi bin Wan Muhammad Dawi. My matrix number is 054340 and I'm from TESOL 5C. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some examples of speaking test questions. There are three types of speaking test questions, which is interview, individual long term, and discussion tasks. Okay, for the first one is interview, which is asking question to student to elicit their language performance. For example, how do you spend your free time? What kind of films? What kind of films that do you like? The second one is individual long term, which is comparing and contrasting visual prompts. Pictures are used most of the time because pictures can easily be obtained. Okay, the third one is discussion task. This is a good opportunity to measure oral interactional skills. For example, the teacher reads out a sentence or article. For example, I am your foreign neighbor. We live in a small town in Turkey. The local government is planning to build an international airport in our area. Let's discuss advantages and disadvantages of this thing. For example, so the students will discuss this sentence with the teacher and point out the advantage and the advantages of this thing. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. So today I'm going to talk about the challenges or the issues of assessing speaking. So the first one, what we should know is testing speaking is the most challenging in terms of test preparation, administration, and scoring. The first reason is because it is difficult to test a large number of learners in a relatively short time. Therefore, the examiners is put under great pressure. And the second issue is it affects listening skill, which means speaking without interaction is observable but very limited, like telling story or speeches, and most of the time it is assessed in interactions. Then the success of the test taker might depend on your listening skill. And there's an involvement of such factors as listening ability, interpretation of tone, and reasoning ability. And so from that, we know that speaking and listening skills are very much related to one another, so it is impossible to keep them mutually exclusive. In most cases, there is an interchange between listening and speaking. And speaking appropriately depends on comprehending spoken input. Therefore, this has an impact on testing speaking, because the tester will not know whether they are testing purely speaking or speaking and listening together. And the third issue is the assessment and scoring of speaking skills. Yes, that is one of the biggest problem, especially when the test is open-ended. It might be difficult to score, and the aspect of speaking that are considered part of its assessments, including grammar, pronunciation, fluency, content, and organization, and also vocabulary. And the last issue is the difficulty in choosing the criteria in assessing speaking ability. There are two levels of assessment in speaking tests that can cause problem in choosing criteria in assessing students' ability, and the problems relate to the decision to determine the aspects to be looked for, whether the examiners focus on the elements of speaking skills or the overall speaking proficiency, which also means speaking for functional purposes. Now moving on to the solutions that can be done for assessing speaking. So the first one is monologue, dialogue, and multi-log speaking tests. So there are three types of speaking tests as a form of assessment. The first type is the monologue speaking test, which is also called the presentation. Students were asked to perform some tasks such as show and tell, where they talk about anything they choose, and this gives the students a chance to make a mini presentation. And the second type is the dialogue speaking test, which is also known as the interview. It is an open-ended test where the students lead a discussion with the teacher, and the students are required to use conversation skills that they have learned before. And the third one is the multi-log speaking test, which is also known as the discussing and debating. Here, the discussions are students generated, and students are put into groups where, as a group, they decide on the topic they feel would be of interest for the rest of the classroom. However, in Malaysia, we saw a similar system being implemented, but were poorly controlled and too restrictive. Dialogues are used in school-based assessment, and monologues and multilogues are common in both school-based assessment and the MUET speaking test. Although it follows this module, it failed to accurately gauge student speaking ability, as the tests were poorly regulated in school-based assessment, and also it is too restrictive, like MUET. So the second solution is using the testing speaking using visual material. Testing speaking using visual material. So this approach does not comprehend on spoken or written material, but it is possible to test speaking using visuals such as pictures, diagrams, and maps. Through a careful selection of material, the testers can control the use of vocabulary and grammatical structures as required. There are different types of visual materials that range in their difficulty to suit all the levels of learners. One common stimulus material could be a series of pictures showing a story where the students should describe, and in the Malaysian context, this system is already in use in school-based oral assessments for primary school. However, there is a problem in using visual stimulus in testing speaking. It lies in that the choice of the material used must be something that all the students can interpret equally well. Since if one student has a difficulty understanding the visual information, it will influence the way they evaluate. So that's all from me.